you're welcome to, as I said yesterday. It's good to put it underneath the speakers. You'll get a good sound out of that.
Yeah.
And
that's fine.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Where is Elsa and Yawn? Yep. I'll just talk to you guys about microphones. So, Elsa, you're doing the front. So the key thing is don't adjust anything on the microphone and don't bump it on you. Same goes for everyone because it will come through the sound. And don't hand it to anyone until Jesus or I has indicated that we're going to that person next. Okay? Thank you for doing that. How'd everyone go getting here? Okay? Yep, that's good. Some other people found it harder. They didn't make it. Here. It's my lady from Sweden who was on the bus here. No, I don't think so. She forgot her passport and she was on her way to the border. Yeah. So she must have got turned around.
Yeah. We had a nice drive from Munich.
It was lovely.
We flew on Munich.
Yeah. Oops, sorry. That's too close.
Yeah, everything's very sensitive speaker-wise in here, so we'll see how we go.
Yeah, thank you, Alex and Olga, for this lovely venue that they found for us. It's it's good.
Please put up your hands, Alex and Olga.
Here they are. They've been helping us out.
Thanks, Alex. The reason why we're in Austria is actually because of Alex and Olga.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
They invited us in. So we came. Yeah. Yeah. So we've just come from Belgium actually. Last week we did a seminar in Belgium.
Some of you were there.
Some of you were there. Yeah. Those of you who were there, it went all right, didn't it?
Yeah.
Aside from maybe a few challenging moments. Yeah. Now Mary and I are in the. Well, this is just the beginning of we're going around the world, I suppose you could say, which we are actually doing. Started in Australia just a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Arrived in Belgium. We were very, very tired in Belgium and very spirit attacked in Belgium. So badly so that I didn't get sleep for nearly 7 days. So it took a bit to sort that out in terms of had to process a bit emotionally to get them off my back, which I've managed to do now to a degree. And generally it was pretty uncomfortable that first week.
It was.
in Belgium. And so we were looking like we were going to have to cancel Belgium altogether based on how badly things were going for us. But we managed to work through some things emotionally, and the spirit sort of backed off of us, which was good. And so, by the time we come to doing the Belgium actual seminar, both of us just had a bit of a snotty nose. And that's about, snotty means, I don't know how to say it in German.
Congested.
Congested nose.
You can tell us in German.
Yeah, whatever that is. So it was pretty tough lead up to our first seminar. Mary and I have been spirit attacked for probably since 2 to 3 weeks before we left, and so it's been pretty hard going for us. So we had to get a fair bit of rest, and we're still needing a bit of rest. I haven't caught up on my sleep yet, so yeah.
But it's marginally more peaceful here in Austria, where we're staying.
Yeah, we're staying up at, is it Stubaton? Stubaton. Very pretty. But there's an excavator excavating. He starts at 7 in the morning. Every morning. So.
But we usually wake by then, so it's like
yeah. It was better than Belgium because Belgium the church bells started ringing at 6 every morning. And they went to 10 o'clock at night as well. So it was like, for us, we live in the bush in Australia, so it's very quiet at night. And Mary and I normally go to sleep about 8 o'clock at night, and I normally wake up at daybreak, so 4 o'clock or 4:30 here. And so people starting work at 7 or 6 with an excavator near our window, it's not so bad. It's just more how late it goes at night as to how much sleep we end up getting.
Yeah. We're catching up.
We're catching up, so
Yes.
yeah. Very interesting to have you all here. Hey? Who's just from Austria? Austrians? Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Have you met each other?
You all know each other?
No.
Yeah.
So you have to catch up then.
Yeah. No, we know each other, but just from SMS.
Oh, okay, from tech.
Yeah, right.
From tech, yeah. Not really.
So only 6. We're in Austria, and only 6 of 43 of you are from Austria.
Yeah. So Germany, the Germans.
Living, right? Not like.
Yeah, we're
Living in,
where you live. Yeah. So the Germans are,
So
the majority.
a number of you.
Yes.
Have many of you met each other? Or?
Yeah.
No? There you go. So
Each other.
probably each session we'd just say, put up your hand again so you can see who is.
Yeah.
And now, other countries, we've got Hungary, I think, is one country, yes?
Yes. Hello, the brothers.
Hungarians.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell they're brothers now. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Good to have you
welcome.
guys. Yeah.
And Serbia?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
I don't know, in
How do you say it in Serbian? Welcome.
Well,
Dobrodošli.
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 Dobrodošli. I like all
There
of
you
them.
go. France? Have we got some French?
Yes,
couple
you're
of
a
French.
Nicholas.
Yeah, I too.
Yeah.
What's coming? Oh, Switzerland. There'll be. Is there
No.
another country in Switzerland? Oh, no.
Yeah, they're coming.
Two. Yeah,
That's right, they're
that'll be
just
a little
coming a bit late. Croatia, we have, yeah.
Croatia.
Yeah.
Yes. So two from Croatia.
Greece.
Greece.
No, where, yeah.
Are you still from Greece, Nicholas?
Where?
Or are you still on the ship?
Yeah.
Both.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. Bored. Yeah.
Okay.
So you a ship master now, or you?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Not even.
Yeah.
Okay.
Italy.
Italy.
Italy, yes.
Yes. So we got
3 from Italy.
three.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is it Italy or Hong Kong? Do we say? Yeah, both.
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 You
Half
go
and
back
half.
and forth still, don't you?
Yes.
Both of them, yeah.
Kind of.
Kind of.
Okay. Where did we miss? Portugal.
Portugal.
1, 2, 3.
Three.
Yeah. You guys know each other? Yeah. Yeah.
We'll see you in Portugal.
Yes.
Good luck. Yeah.
That's why you're all sitting apart, because you used to live in one house together. That's true. Okay. Where did we miss? Who?
Poland.
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 Oh, welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome.
I wanted to come to Poland to the Bears.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. We were.
And where are you from, Sven?
England, but I live in Germany.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And who
And
have we
Sweden.
missed? Sweden?
Yes.
Sweden, yes.
Daniela
Swedish.
and Johnny.
There you go.
England.
Yes. So,
Elsa. Yep. Yeah.
and who else is missing?
Who did we miss?
Who did we miss?
Oh, it's not everyone.
No?
Yeah.
Yep, good on. There you go.
Oh.
You're all earthlings.
Yeah.
But not really, hey? Not really earthlings.
Soulless.
Souliness. Souliness. Human souls
Yeah.
coming from far away to this earth
Yeah.
to have your first experience of life.
Yeah.
The experience of life here isn't that good though, is it?
It's rubbish.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about that a bit.
Yeah. Just
practical
yeah,
things.
practical things. If we just use the rear exits, just be careful of the technology all around you.
Yeah.
It's fairly out of your way, but just be careful not to bump it and so on. Does everyone know where the toilets are, the bathrooms? Yep. So if you go, if you come out of this room and head towards reception, it's on your right and down a set of stairs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right next to the reception entry, really.
Yeah. If you head towards reception, you'll just see it there.
Yeah.
That's the set of. They said if you do want to purchase any food or drinks, there's a bar and a cafe here in the hotel, so when we have breaks, there's always someone around. If there's no one serving, just press the bell. We'll have some breaks during the day, probably one main break in the middle if you want to have something to eat. Yep,
Around 1 o'clock probably.
yeah.
Do you want to do bathroom breaks or do we just?
Yes, we will do bathroom breaks, and I didn't get enough of them in Belgium myself, so. And I'd like to drink more water. We didn't get a chance to drink a lot of water either in Belgium either. Mind you, a lot of that was because the water wasn't very good, but.
There's better water now.
It's better water now.
Yeah, so probably every hour, hour and a half we'll have a bathroom break. But if you do need to slip out, that's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have a donation box?
Yes.
We do at the
we do.
back, the red box there at the back. Yeah. Thanks for reminding us.
Yeah, we keep forgetting.
And which currency do you want?
Bring it on. Yeah. No, we're going to. We're in Europe obviously, and we'll be in Portugal next. So Euro still.
Euros preferable.
Yeah. Then we're going to.
For the moment. Yeah.
Britain. So.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then we're going to Canada and the US.
And also, if you'd rather donate online, you can. I should write it down. Actually, I forgot to do that. Belgium as well. It's just donate. DivineTruth.com, and that should get you to our donation page. And on there, you can donate by credit card, by TransferWise, which is a really good thing we've been using a lot because of the travel, and also bank or other methods as well. So, yeah.
And we should say thank you to all of you who've already donated.
Yes, without your donations, we actually wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that. Yeah. Setting up the event was quite a lot of effort for us. We had to buy a whole new setup of tech because our old setup of tech was no longer licensed to operate in Europe or in the USA anymore. Because the people had changed all the frequencies of things over the last few years with TV and radio, digital TV and radio, where our old equipment was no longer licensed for here, we could only use it in Australia. So obviously we had to then buy a whole heap of new equipment and then learn how to use it as well and put it in bags as well and so forth. So that took quite a long time. And we had to get a lot of it. We couldn't buy a lot of it in Australia because it's not our frequency. So we had to buy it from the US or Europe. And so it took months and months and months for us to do all of that. And then on top of that, a lot of our venues took a long time to organise as well. Mary started off wanting to do living room, but then we looked at a photo of Alex's living room and go, yeah, 10 people are probably going to fit there.
And a lot more of you.
And a lot more of you wanted to come. Yeah. So we had to start looking for venues, and in different countries that's quite difficult. And of course, a lot of the places don't want Jesus and Mary to come to their venues. So it ends up that on the average, we have to look through 50 venues to find one that suits us, or one that they'll let us use. And in Belgium, it was close to 100 venues we had in mind.
Austria wasn't too bad.
Austria wasn't too bad. It was less than that. It was far less than that.
2 or 3.
2 or 3, yeah. That was good. But other countries, just depends on how difficult they find the whole concept of Jesus and Mary coming to visit, as to how much they let us use their venues. Yeah. And a lot of venues are also not that suitable because you want a bit of aircon generally, mostly not for you because it doesn't matter for you. But that's a joke though. For the equipment, no, it's not like that. But obviously you don't want everything to get so hot that all of you are so uncomfortable that you can barely concentrate. And also you want soft seats, don't you? You don't want to sit for 4 hours on a hard seat. Trust me, we've had some venues like that. It's very uncomfortable. So in every place we go, we try to organise things to be as comfortable as possible for you. Yeah. And so that takes a bit of time. So we started organising it in January this year. And we're now in July and we're here. So that's how long it's taking. So we're very happy to be here and meet many of you for the first time. sometimes we see your emails pass through the office and things like that, and we wonder who's that person in Hungary, or who's that person in Croatia, or who's that person in Germany, or whatever. And because many of you we've never met before, and so we're very pleased to meet you for the first time.
And it's lovely to see people that I haven't seen for 10 years or more. Some of you. So it's really nice.
Yeah.
Nice to hug you.
And there's something unique about all of you, and that is that you're actually interested in truth. That's a unique thing. I don't know how you find it in your personal lives, but it's pretty hard to find people interested in truth, isn't it, on earth? Everyone's so embroiled in their day-to-day activities, their day-to-day life. There's a lot of detunement from the concept of God, from the concept of there being life after earth. And so people are so focused on living their life here, very little focus on what's going to happen in their future, and very little interest in the subject for the most part. And even those people who are quite religious, or say they're quite religious, really don't have a very strong desire for truth either. I don't know if you found that, but that's what I've generally found. So it's interesting that you, as a group of people, some of the few people obviously that are at the moment interested in God's truth, which is a wonderful thing. Yeah. And it's something that we'd like to share more of with you over the next 3 days. So we should probably mention what we're going to do over the next 3 days with you. Today we want to have a discussion with you today about God's personality and nature, and we want to focus on a few specific things about God and his personality and how it's expressed through his laws. So that's sort of what we'd like to focus a bit on today. Tomorrow we would like to talk about how you want to break those laws.
And how that's going.
And how that's going for you. Is breaking the law working well in your life? So we want to talk about that, and in that process we'll not only look at ways that you might be obvious to you that you're breaking the law, but also ways maybe that it's not so obvious where you're breaking the law and therefore receiving a penalty for breaking law without really understanding why. And so we'd like to talk about those things tomorrow, and we may even get onto that subject a bit today, depending on how we go. And then on Sunday, we're thinking of doing a number of different things with you. Firstly, we're thinking that we'll open the group up to some just general questions that you would like to specifically ask questions about. But also we were thinking we might open it up to some spirits to ask some questions as well. So that way we can help some spirits while we're here, as well as help yourselves. Every place we go to, there's obviously many spirits from your history that either come along with you to an event to listen, or spirits that are already here in this area. So in Austria, now we're in Austria, that have never heard divine truth either, even in the spirit world. So it gives us an opportunity to have that first discussion with them, and also hopefully allow them to talk to some of our spirit friends so that they can progress as well.
Because they're still quite interested in the earth, sometimes this is the best place for them to start hearing about it. Yeah, and we also find that every country has its own emotional injuries. And because you're a collective of countries, obviously all coming from Europe in some way or another, as the rest of the world sees you, obviously some of your emotional injuries are going to be different to others who are here. And so this gives us an opportunity to talk with you too, and also on Sunday for you to be open about what things you're facing and what questions you have about that, and how does that relate to God's truth as well. So we'd encourage you to do that on Sunday, but also all the way through the group. We're not going to have a lot of time to spend with you personally, because obviously Mary and I are talking for 4 or 5 hours. We are starting our day. Usually we're here. Well, tomorrow it would be a bit later, but today we're here
to start. We had to leave home at 8 o'clock. And for the most part, we go home, we have to unload all of our audio in preparation for the next day, which usually takes an hour or so. And then we have dinner and go to bed, basically and then we get up the next day and we do the same. So not a lot of time to spend with you during the next 3 days, but Mary and I are staying longer this time. So in Brussels, what we did was we stayed. We had a period of time. We knew we'd probably get some heavy spirit attack when we arrived in Brussels because of some of the spirits we knew who were using that opportunity. So we had to allow some time at the beginning of the, before we held an event to just recover from that. And then at the event, we met all these people, but we didn't have much chance to get to know them because after the event we left pretty much the day after. So, and in this case, any of you who are sticking around for a few days, we might get the opportunity to catch up with you more informally. And even if it means sort of even hiring a hall here for another day or something next week, which we might be able to do. So it just depends how many of you are here. And if it's 10 people, then we'll probably meet in somebody's house or something like that. But if it's not, and there's 20 or so sticking around, then we might come back here in a smaller room or something like that and have a chat. So we get to know you a bit better.
See how you feel by Sunday.
See how you feel by Sunday. By Sunday, usually by Saturday, everyone's a bit saturated. That's fine. And Sunday is often a blur for most people. Yeah.
Can I ask who felt a bit nervous coming this morning? Yeah. I have this really that's great that you can feel that, and that's just fear, isn't it? But often what I'm sensing is that there's just quite an opportunity for you guys here, and often I get nervous when there's an opportunity coming up. There's a chance for change. There's something new about to happen. So I just encourage you all to embrace the opportunity of it.
Yeah. Key is to relax a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, mics, from now on, let's use the mic. So, Nico, if we have someone.
My fear is about losing the control of my life.
Yeah.
Because when I open to divine,
to God,
I have to respond divine. My law of attraction changes, and I don't like that. I have control.
Yeah.
But Nicholas, last time I saw you, you said you don't like it then as well.
Actually, I have a debate with God regarding
Yes, and this is something we'd like to talk about tomorrow a lot. Many of you are in a state of debate with God. Yeah, it's like that song, I fought the law and the law won. That song. Most of you are in a state of fighting the law and therefore really fighting God. And that's not very good for you, but also it's important to work through the reasons why. So that's something we want to talk about during this group, actually.
But I feel like your spirit guides are pretty excited about you being here. That's the buzz I feel. Yeah.
Gives them more chance to help you in your life, right?
Inspire you.
Yeah. All right. Is there any questions you'd like to ask?
About the proceedings, maybe.
Proceedings before we proceed?
Yeah.
No, you're all good.
Charlotte?
If there's an opportunity of an informal meeting, I would have to book an apartment or something.
You'd have to change your bookings.
Yeah. So when will you decide on what day it will happen?
It would most likely be Wednesday if we did it. Mary and I will need a rest of a day at least after the event.
And on Tuesday I want to go to the Alps. I want to go up an Alp. Yeah.
We think that Tuesday might still be a fine day, and we want an opportunity to do a walk up at one of the.
It's a sunny day.
Mountains up there.
And then
some of you might want to join us actually if you're still here.
Okay, thank you.
But we'll hopefully decide by
probably Saturday
evening.
I would say.
Just next Tuesday.
Do you know how long it will take on Sunday? Just like
how long
Yeah, we're hoping to start early Sunday with you guys. So instead of starting at 11 as we had advertised, we're hoping we might be able to start at 10 or even a bit earlier and finish earlier, if that's all right with you. Because we do need to pack up and everything, the venue on Sunday. So is that, if we start earlier, is that going to affect anyone negatively on Sunday?
If you are leaving Sunday,
Yeah, it would probably help you if you are leaving Sunday later.
Yeah.
And we're thinking possibly be done by 2:30 in the afternoon on Sunday.
How we can be of service, how we can help you with morning packing and packing and stuff like that. If there is some time that we can come earlier, help you pack up and go drink a coffee or do whatever, and you don't have all the strain.
We need to be pretty independent with our packing because it's you should see the way Jesus has designed these packing cases.
It's
There's
a 3D.
It's a 3D spatial
Yeah.
situation.
And it took me 4 days to work out how to pack the cases. They're all foamed and they had to all be cut and everything.
Yeah.
And Mary and I, because we're the only persons that are going to be at every event, we have to know how to set up and dismantle, and we have to know where everything is. So when it comes to dismantling, there are certain things you'll be able to do with chairs and other things like that, but when it comes to the technology, we're going to have to do that because we need to be able to unpack it in the next event.
Yeah. Thank you though. If there's anything, I'll let you know. Anything that we need help with.
Yeah, from now on, after, so this here is the only time we're not running an event every weekend. Next weekend we're not running an event, but after that it's almost every weekend. So it's
the next 3 months.
The next 3 months.
Yeah.
And so I think it's 14 events, 39 days or something of actual time when we're talking to people.
Formally, but I'm sure we'll do lots of informal
yeah.
talking too.
And so yeah, we've got to pace ourselves over the next 4 months. We won't be home in Australia until middle of November. And from here, so here we go to Portugal, then we go to England, then we go to Ireland, then we go to Canada, and then 2 places in the US, and then home.
Yeah, it should be good.
Yeah.
Should be really good.
So those people we've already seen, including the people from home, wanted to say, even though they have not met you, they love the idea that you are here, and many of them actually contributed. In fact, without their contributions, we wouldn't have been able to be here because we didn't receive enough contributions for the trip, except by the additions that came from people in Australia. Yeah. So you actually have also many of them to thank for us being here.
And a lot of them asked me to send their love to you,
yeah.
and people all over the world actually. People we're yet to go to, when we started the trip, wrote to me and said, please share our love with everyone that we meet.
So there's people interested in God's truth all around the world. The issue really is that there's there's only small groups in each country at this stage, and so many of you know what it's like being the only ones interested, I suppose, in God's truth, and it is tricky, isn't it? Because there's so many pressures on you. As soon as they hear, you're listening to a guy who's claiming he's Jesus, there's so many pressures on you to think that it's a cult and all these things. And of course, Mary and I don't run a cult. We
imagine the effort it would be.
Way too much effort for us to run a cult. And you know, our interest is just sharing God's truth with you, and letting you decide what you want to do with that.
Yeah, and it's so important that each of us forms our own personal relationship with God.
Yeah.
You know, we're really just here to share the truth about God, but you're not going to get to God through us. You know, it's really important that you establish who God is through your own connection with God, and yeah.
So that's what we're going to share with you primarily, how to do that. And it's something we have thousands of years experience with. Yeah. So it's easy for us to answer most of your questions in that regard, because there's not a lot of questions we haven't heard. Yeah. Most people ask them at some time prior to your thinking of them, is what we found.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't ask them.
That's right.
Good, always good.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't think there's anything else we need
No,
to mention.
let's get this show on the road.
Just get the show on the road. Yeah, all right.
I think that's all.
All right. Mary and I are just going to swap places. Can everyone see the whiteboard okay? Yep. In Brussels, when I began the conversation with everyone there, we started talking about whether God exists or not. And because we've already had sort of that discussion, we don't want to have that discussion with you. So I'm just going to make a blanket statement. God exists. If you don't agree with that, then you're probably in the wrong room. Now, the fact that God exists means that God is real. And that this is an interesting thing to bear in mind in your analysis of life. And the question I've got for many of you is, God is real. So what does that mean to you? You see, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have lives that we're involved in things every day, we're doing things every day, we're having relationships with people, having learning processes ourselves. But how often do we contemplate that if God exists and God is real, what does that mean for me in my future? And what does it even mean for me right now if God exists and God is real? It's an interesting thing to contemplate. And if God exists and God is real, the next and probably the even bigger question becomes, what is God's personality and nature? You know, how does God feel? What does God think? What does God, how does God express her personality? What is her personality? What qualities does God have? And why are those qualities important to me? If you think about it from a logical perspective, let's say at the moment humans don't really understand, do they, how big the universe is. They know that it seems to be expanding. They know that because they can measure that there's some things travelling farther away from us over time, and they measure it by what's called redshift and blueshift with regard to light to see how fast those things are travelling, whether they're travelling towards us or away from us. And in the process, they can see that it appears that the universe is expanding, which would tend to indicate that the physical universe in which we live has sort of like an outer boundary of some kind. And if the universe has an outer boundary and all the galaxies and everything is it is slowly expanding, then that means the universe is in a state of constant change, doesn't it? So things are travelling at hundreds of millions speed of light per second. Things are travelling apart, and it appears like that might be a never-ending thing. But of course, there's so much that humans are yet to know about the universe itself, and so the main thing we can assume from that is, well, it appears like the universe might have an edge. We don't really know. It might have a limit. We don't really know that either. But the fact that it's all expanding means it must be going somewhere, and therefore expanding to into greater usage of space. But that's the physical universe. And 95% of all matter is actually existing in the invisible universe. So they predicted through seeing the effects of things on other things that there's a whole lot of matter that exists in the universe, and they are right in that regard. A whole lot of matter exists in the universe that is unseen. Now, that matter is in different dimensions, different dimensional spaces. So there's this physical universe. But there's also you could say, a universe which is also physical, but it's in other dimensional spaces, in areas we can't see with our eyes. We can't measure it using the visible spectrum of light. And also it takes up a similar space to the physical universe. This is something most people don't understand, mostly because they've never seen it. And you know, the advantage of coming from the spirit world like Mary and I have is we've seen it, so it's easy for us to recognise it as real. So there's a physical universe, and then there's these other aspects of the universe. Let's just call them, there's unseen parts of the universe that we can't see, that are still a part of the universe. Now, if God, one of God's qualities is that God is the creator, then it means that God created that. And God not only created it, but also created the laws that govern it, which is more important, if you think about it, than the universe itself. Because without laws governing the universe would be absolutely chaotic. And yet it's not. It's governed by laws. And all of the universe is governed by laws. So right down to the smallest particle measured at this stage by man, and there's actually smaller particles than what I measured, right up to the biggest masses in the universe that humans can measure, which are galaxies for the most part, all of them are covered by laws, and there's a seemingly infinite number of laws, and every time humans discover new laws, they can apply those new laws mathematically to the things that they have not yet discovered, and they discover more as a part of that process. And to be honest with you, that's how you ended up with your mobile phone. Your mobile phone is a process of humans discovering laws that govern the physical universe, and also laws that govern a part of the universe that is unseen, because your signal from your mobile phone goes via links that you cannot see. There's a device on the other end you can see, but the transmission of the signals you can't see. They happen near speed of light, and you can't see any of that. But at some point someone had to discover the laws that govern that in order for you to be able to use a mobile phone. So the reality is there are many laws that humans are using right now that they can't see, but they know exist because they're using them. Right? So we're discovering that this physical world is governed by law. Right? So you could say, if you wanted to summarise the types of law, we can do that in a minute, but you can see that the physical universe that you're currently sitting in is definitely controlled by laws. And that would also indicate that's one of the evidences, in fact, that a creator exists. Because a chaotic universe wouldn't create a whole heap of laws by itself spontaneously. A question? Thank you. So just keep your hand up so people know. That's it.
Why is the universe so big? Like humans only live in such a small space?
Do they?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. See, that's right. You can see, for any of us, no matter what our stage of development, there's things we don't know, isn't there? So that's a very important thing to remember, isn't it? That there's a whole heap of things we don't know. Now, there's things that Mary and I know that you don't know, but there's also things you don't know that other people don't know. And then there's things that Mary and I don't know as well. You know, of course. And of course, God knows everything. So that this is something that should help us with something that I'd like to talk about a lot more with you today, which is the word perspective. So the question was, why is there such a big universe when it seems there's such a small amount of people? But we don't know there's a small amount of people. We also don't know that there might not be other Earths, and in fact there are other Earths. Like I've met the people from the other Earths. Well, when I say met the people, I've met usually 2 people from the other Earths only at this stage. But that was when I was in the soul union state with Mary. We met people who were in the same state with from other Earths, 6 other Earths at this stage, and we met them and conversed with them, and they told us their experience and we told them ours, so that we know for certain those Earths exist. But that's only 6 in entire huge space. What's God's purpose for the rest of that space? Is a good question, isn't it? And it is something that's worth considering for your future, is why would God create such a huge expanse only to have most of it empty? Is that God's intention? Obviously it wouldn't make sense that it's God's intention, would it? So obviously there's got to be something going on there as well. Yeah.
Is it linked to what some people are planning to do with Mars, to colonize Mars?
Well, I suppose I shouldn't get onto the subject of colonising Mars.
Cornelius was here, another one of the 14. He has a lot to say about colonising Mars.
All the 14 have a lot to say about colonising Mars, and we're not that hot on the idea. But if you think about a place like Mars and compare it to Earth, what do you think? What do you feel? Obviously, Earth has been custom made for human life. Mars, not custom made for human life. Now, while it is true that we have the capacity and the ability to develop technology to go to places, we also have to start considering the expense on Earth as to what that's causing. So every rocket we fly into space, causes pollution and degradation to this environment, that it takes resources from this environment. We've got to start considering the balance of these things. But God didn't stop you or want to stop you from exploring the universe. But there are far better ways than creating a rocket. Yeah? When you're a spirit, you can just go to the places, and go to the new place and go to the new place, and you don't need a suit, a space suit, because your spirit body is immune to the effects of the spirit. The physical body has limitations and the spirit body doesn't have them. So your spirit body is able to also go large distances without a spacecraft. So, most of my exploration of the universe, which I've done a lot of, has been primarily done in my own body as a spirit. And trust me, it's a lot better and more comfortable than wearing a spacesuit. So I would recommend that you don't wear a spacesuit and you instead use your spirit body to examine those things. But that also gets us down to the question is, what is the real you, which we also need to discuss today, right, as well. If we go next to you, Mike.
Is the universe always expanding because more souls incarnate?
Well, that's another good question. More souls are incarnating, so obviously there is going to need to be somewhere to place them. But if you look at the size of the universe compared to how many souls have incarnated at this point, there's a great discrepancy, isn't there, between how much is in the universe and how there are more planets and stars than there are people. So that is indicative of the fact that there must be further things that God has planned for you. And that's a interesting concept to follow as well. Like, what does God have planned for you? What's the fastest way to find that out? Asking. Yeah. And so this is what I want to focus your attention on in our weekend, is I want to focus your attention on your relationship with God rather than perhaps these other questions, because in the process of this relationship with God, most of these other questions will be answered. And so it's sort of like the old adage, you know, do you give a man a fish to eat or do you teach him how to fish? Right? So what we're trying to do here is not give you small bites of answers of things that we have discovered, but rather encourage your desire to discover, and also encourage you to find out how you find the answers, like for yourself. Because trust me, it's a lot more interesting finding the answer for yourself than it is having someone tell you the answer. And I don't know, you know, it's like, let's take sex for example. If I tell you about sex,
everyone might go home.
Is that as good as having it? For those of you who've had it, you know probably any words I use to express or talk to you about it, compared to having it, the words don't really do the action justice, do they? And this is the same with the majority of your life, actually. Until you have the personal experience, you're not really going to understand the joy and the happiness and also lots of other feelings that come from going through the actual experience. So what I would like to encourage you guys to do is to understand how to have the experience rather than just talk about the experience. And you can see why. Obviously, once the experience becomes personal for you, then of course your faith increases, your desire increases, your happiness and joy increases. But if the experience is never personal, we're just talking words, aren't we? Up until that point. We're talking ideas or concepts which are fascinating in themselves, but they're not anywhere near as enjoyable as having the experience. Right? So this is why we need to say a lot of words. You know, the next 15 hours you're in our company probably, and we're going to say a lot of words. But what we want to do is try to help you to have the experience. That's our goal. Yeah. So getting back to this idea, the Creator obviously created this, let's call it the universe, and obviously in particular there's these important things called laws that govern the universe, which are in a way an expression of the Creator's desire. So the laws tell us something about God as well. They tell us something about God's personality and God's nature, and that's interesting to contemplate. But also there's this thing of perspective we need to gain individually. What I mean by perspective is, how big is God compared to you? Get some perspective. See, the first human couple, a woman and a man, they decided at some point that they could be equal to God. They lost all sense of perspective. And there were reasons why they felt themselves to be a beautiful created being, of which God feels you are, of course, because He made you, and of course He thinks that He made you beautiful. But they then began to believe that they didn't need God to know or understand the universe, and that they could be gods themselves. And the biggest emotional injury that we have on this planet is our own feeling that we are our own lawmaker, that we have the right to govern ourselves. That's the biggest emotional injury that we have. So let's go, good question, and to Alex on this side.
So my question is, the first one couple, they made a mistake.
Yes.
And
Which probably we would have made if we were in the same circumstance.
okay.
Yep.
My question is, why didn't they realize and went back to God? Because if I make a mistake, after that I realize I made a mistake,
Yep.
then probably I have more errors than they had.
The problem with making a mistake, and this is something you're going to find in your own life, the problem with making a mistake is that now a new condition in your soul exists because of the mistake. And that new condition then encourages you to make more mistakes. And what happens generally is a person doesn't see the trajectory of their mistakes until a long time down the future, when they can measure the results of those mistakes. So a man and a man make a mistake. So let's say they're here and they make a mistake. That puts them in this trajectory. It puts them in a direction towards making more mistakes. So they make another mistake and another mistake. But at this stage, they're not self-aware enough to measure the results of their own mistakes. It's only when the mistakes become more and more painful that the results start to get measured.
But then often...
But by the time the results are being measured, there's so many mistakes that have been made that the average person doesn't want to unmake them. They just want to continue trying something different. And if you think about your own life, this happens to many of you in your own life. You make a mistake and you go, oh, this isn't working out so well, I'll just do another thing. Without a lot of contemplation or thought necessarily, and you do the next thing. And sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction to the previous thing you did, but it's just as much sin as the previous thing. So an example of that is like, let's say I'm a woman and I have a relationship with a man and he's very dominating, he's very controlling. So that was a mistake. So what do? I say, I don't want to be with a dominating man anymore. What do I want to have instead? I want to dominate the man. So I go and now find a man who I can dominate, which is another mistake. And see, I haven't measured the full reasons or consequences or causes even as to why I made the previous mistake. And so that then causes me to make a further mistake and a further mistake. And this is the trouble with sin, is once you start on its road, frequently it just causes you to sin more. And very few people have the internal set of awareness or moral character where they'll stop that process. Now, a mon and a man weren't, most of you sort of might think that they were built with a moral compass, but actually they were in the same state as you were when you were a baby, and there was no moral compass yet. It had to be developed. But in the process of making choices and decisions, their moral compass slowly got distorted, right? And so by the time they became aware of the problems they had created, there was also no longer a desire to fix it with God. They wanted to fix it themselves. They wanted to correct it themselves.
And we also add to that, very often as humans, we're very bad at measuring how we got there. We often say, oh, it wasn't the true, we don't put the effects with the actual cause. We make a series of mistakes and then we blame something else for the effects, you know. We don't see, oh, it was that decision back there. We blame others, or we blame this other thing that we did, and we're very bad at putting causes with effects when we're sinning.
Yeah. So I've talked to our mon and a man, and their answer to that question, which is the exact question I asked them, was that they had gone on for many hundreds of years before they actually realised how big a mistake they made. And the result of that, of course, was that now they didn't know either how to undo the mistakes either. They didn't have, they had blocked off the potentiality of a relationship with God themselves, and in the process of doing that, there was no, they had to work it all out how to undo their own mistakes now. Now, as you well know, for many of you, you know, having no help to deal with your mistakes is tough, isn't it? Like, you don't know whether you should do this thing or that thing, or should you make, what decision should you make? And that's the exact same feeling they had. Like, how do I now undo these mistakes? You know, they could see, by that stage, they could see that their relationship with God had been broken, but also they didn't know how to fix it, and they didn't know what to do to fix it. So they just continued in their way until they passed. And then, of course, eventually they made their way to the sixth year of the spirit world, which is where they were when I first met them. And then, obviously, they heard about God's truth, and then they progressed from that point onwards. But the key for many of us is to realise that if we were in the same circumstance, we possibly would have done the same things, you know. And if we're honest with ourselves, many of us like to be, or like to believe, we're our own God, our own lawmaker, and as a result of that, we have that same feeling that they have. I want to make my own laws. I want to ignore the potentiality of there being a God who made laws that would govern my life. But let's just go to Alex for a moment, because you had...
Hi. Since we're talking about size and perspective,
Yep.
Isn't it that the more love, the bigger the things are? And was it in times of Ammon and the man that everything was bigger, themselves and the trees and everything?
It is true that their souls and their physical form was obviously better than ours are today, and also their souls were in a more pristine state. And they were the only beings that were, you know, the only humans that weren't born, right? So they were given a fully formed body, and so their birth, if you like, was like an unincarnated soul, like a child, put into a fully formed body. So they're the only people who've ever had that experience on this earth, a child being put into a fully formed body. But emotionally and intellectually and mentally and spiritually and sexually, they were undeveloped. They had to learn how to develop those things. So even though they had a perfect body that was created for them, and even though the earth by this stage had been well prepared for their arrival, so there was food everywhere, animals everywhere, creatures everywhere, and in the place where they arrived, which was near where the Middle East is today, instead of it being like it is today, which is almost like a barren desert, it was a rainforest. It was beautiful. And we're talking 150,000 years or more ago on this earth. So there's been a lot of things happen to the earth since then. And in that place, so they arrived in this beautiful place, they arrived in a beautiful condition, but with no experience. And that's the thing you've got to bear in mind. There's no experience. There's no experience. They had to gather experience. And so they were like babies in an adult body. They had to learn that they could eat. They had to learn they could drink. They had to learn everything, just like you would if you were a baby having to learn everything. But they had an adult body to do that in. Does that make sense to you? Now, they're the only people on earth who've ever experienced that. So talking to them is very interesting, because you find out a lot of things about their experience and what their experience is like. But what I'm trying to do is hone you back into this thing of that there is laws and perspective. And why did I raise Ammon and a man? Well, because Ammon and a man were placed into this universe when they were unconsciously created. In other words, there was a time before they incarnated on earth, they were unconscious of themselves. They didn't know themselves. They had no experience. They weren't self-aware. And then as soon as they were placed on the earth, they became self-aware. And their self-awareness gradually grew as time went on. And of course, they then made choices and decisions. But in process, they lost perspective. They lost perspective because they started to believe that they could be their own God. So the lost perspective. The perspective being that the Creator created this universe, and the Creator created the laws that govern it, and therefore the Creator was much, much larger than anything you could even imagine, because he's larger than the universe itself. He has the power to control the universe itself. That's how much power God has. Now, when you're in this throes of development as a child, you don't understand these things. And you don't even, and many people on earth, even as adults who are 70, 80 years old, don't understand those things. They still feel that their power is the biggest power on earth. Many of us humans believe we are the biggest power on earth. You know, often from an evolutionary point of view, it's called we're the dominant predator, the apex predator. Yeah, but God doesn't enter that equation. And not that God's an apex predator. But God is far greater than anything as human we could ever imagine. And far greater, and all of God's qualities I've learned are infinite in their nature. And that's something even as a human, for the entire time that I've progressed, I still struggle to understand, even though I've received a lot of God's love, still struggle to understand what that really means about God. Like, how is God this infinite creature? It's such an amazing concept. I know it to be true because that's been my experience of him. Right? But even though I know it to be true, my mind struggles with the idea of it. And this is why your mind's no good. We talked about that last week in Brussels, how useless your mind is. Your mind was created by God for a purpose, to help you out, but not to become the dominant creature of your life, the dominant governing force of your life. Your mind has severe limitations, and this is something that I learnt in the first century, and I know to be a fact. Now, most people on earth don't believe that. Most people on earth believe the mind is the thing to develop. The mind is the thing to grow. The mind is the thing that causes you to make decisions. But it's not actually true, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But let's get back to this, because I want to just develop the theme a bit of the perspective. If you have questions about the perspective or the...
Yeah, it's just,
microphone.
how accurate are
Microphone, please.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How accurate are the 10 Commandments then to get you back on track?
So we will be talking about what's called morals. And you can define morals as God's definition of what is true and false, or what God's definition of what is right or wrong. And God did create a set of laws that determine right and wrong. And so we need to discuss some of those. Now, some of the ones included in the Ten Commandments have no bearing on God's thoughts, but some of them do have some bearing. So one of those was the law not to murder anybody, of course. So that was because it would infringe upon other people's free will. So that certainly is a moral law from the Ten Commandments that is right, that God has defined as right. But there are other ones like honour your father and your mother, which is another law from the Ten Commandments, which God doesn't agree with. The reason why God doesn't agree with that is because what happens when the honour of your mother and father precludes your honour of God's law? In other words, what happens when your mum and dad don't believe in the law? Should you still honour them? But there's a difference between honouring them and then in terms of honouring them as a person, in terms of saying they have the right to make their own decisions and make their own laws, and honouring what they tell you to do. Because if they tell you to break the law, you can't honour that, right? And unless you want to get a penalty of that. So there are obviously man-made laws, or you could say man-made constructs or ideas, which we think are law, but have no bearing on what God treats as law. Right? So it's very important to understand that when we talk about law here, we're talking about the laws God established, not the laws of humans. So of course we want to discover what they are, because the more we can live in harmony with them, the happier we'll be, obviously. But we also mustn't assume that just because humans have made a whole series of laws, that it means that they are justified in doing so, or that those laws are in agreement with God's. Because obviously there's going to be laws that humans make that are in complete disagreement with God's. Yeah? So we can talk about that a little later, but I want to bring you back to this idea of perspective still. If I lose perspective, if I lose the perspective that I am the created ant, well, human, but really I'm not much bigger than an ant. When you look at the universal aspect, how big the universe is, I'm like less than an ant, really. That's how I'm small in comparison to the universe. Of course, when I say I'm just using my physical body here, because actually your soul can be much bigger than your physical body is, depending on its development. But if we're just looking at physical form, I, as a human, am much, much smaller than the universe around me, and I need to have perspective. I need to have perspective. If God is infinite and God created this huge, huge thing that I can't even grasp intellectually how large it is, and I live in it, then I must be less than God is. Right? And this is a very important thing to remember for your life. It's when you try to make yourself equal to God or greater to God that you're going to run into most of your problems. And one of the ways we, as humans, make ourselves equal to God or greater than God is by creating our own law and living by that. This is one of the ways in which we dishonour God, actually, and in the process cause a lot of trouble for ourselves. And that's because we've lost perspective. You could say losing perspective is arrogance. Can you see that? It's becoming arrogant. And many of us don't realise it, but we are extremely arrogant when it comes to our relationship with God. As Nico pointed out earlier, we're even able to believe that when we have an argument with God, we're going to win. Like, as if that is ever going to happen. It's never going to happen. You set yourself up in opposition to the universal creator. Do you think it's going to work out well? Now, most of us think it is going to work out well. That's how arrogant we've become. We think it's going to work out well. Yeah, you on?
Can it also be like fear of the greatness?
Well, fear does play a part in our desire to ignore law, that is true. But how much of it is fear versus anger? Like angry that we've got to, meet criteria, law, in order to have a happy life. Like, how much of it is that we want to be like what we view as free, but actually harming others in the process of our freedom, So you've got to start. A lot of times we can explain things away by saying, I was just afraid. But a lot of times when I see a person doing that, they're really just angry. And they call it afraid. Because why would I call something fear when it's actually anger? Why would I do that? What's my reason for doing that, do you think? Franz, you want to?
So to mask or justify it.
Yes, to mask my true desire. Why would I want to mask my true desire? Because I don't want to change it. Like if I have to honestly admit to myself that the main reason why I'm in this argument with God is because I'm angry rather than afraid. You know, what I've learnt is that most people don't argue with people they're afraid of. Isn't that true? Like, if you think about the people you're truly afraid of, do you ever go up to them and start a barney with them? Most of the time not, right? You don't. You go, you know, that person you're afraid of, you go, you know, I see them down the street, I go, walk in the other direction. You know, like, that's how I usually act in my fear. But when I'm in my anger, now I'll feel like I've got to say something to that person, you know, I've got to go. You see the difference? And so when we're in this sort of state with God, where we're having an argument with God, we're really in a state of anger, not in a state of fear, right? And most of us don't realise why we're in a state of anger. That's true. You know, there's a lot of reasons why we might be in a state of anger. But anger is a lot about power, isn't it? Gaining power over something. So most of us want to feel that we want to gain power over our life. We want to gain power over our emotion. We want to also gain power over God. We want to get to the stage where we think that what we do is more important than what God thinks we should do. So in a lot of ways we're in an argument, and not because we're afraid. We're in an argument because we're angry. For whatever reason, we're angry. Oftentimes related to our childhood, which we can talk about tomorrow. Yeah. If we go next to Nico then. What was your name? Tim.
When we realize that we don't want to do something, how do we go then further from there? Like we realize, yeah, fuck, and now? What do we do then?
Well, let's talk about that tomorrow, because that's one of the things I want to talk about. Remember, we said in our introduction today that I wanted to talk to you about why I want to fight the law. What's driving me to fight the law, and then how do I reverse that decision to fight the law versus like learn the law and want to live by the law. You know, that they are good questions we need to answer, but we'll try to focus on those questions tomorrow. Yeah. Nico, and then down here. What was your name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just here. Yeah. So Nico.
I've made breakthroughs
Yeah.
by telling God exactly that, about control, about everything.
Yeah.
And
But has it changed your life, Nico? Like, do you find yourself receiving more of God's love, or do you still find yourself in the fight?
if I choose every day to
Yeah.
abide by His laws and to be humble,
Yeah.
I receive a lot of love.
Yes.
If I want to wear my facade, say, okay, today I'm not in the mood.
Yeah. Not in the mood. Yeah.
Yeah, the law works. The law will remind me that I break the law.
Yeah.
And when I fall down, like what you painted in the board,
Yeah.
the law will become stronger and stronger because it's a force.
Of course.
It's action and reaction.
But my question for you though is, what is going to change in you where you no longer decide I'm not in the mood? Where you no longer decide I don't. You never finish up deciding I don't want to do it.
You always
want to do it.
Yeah.
So
You love doing it.
there needs to be a time in your life, doesn't there, where you actually give up all resistance, knowing that all resistance to the law is futile, rather than going, I will live happily with this law or that law or that law, but those other laws over there I'm going to not live by. A person who does that, you could say, has not yet grown in love enough to understand, and in love of self enough to understand that any law they break is going to cause regret, cause sadness.
I already know that, and I'm prepared to feel the sadness.
This is why I'm saying why. Why would a person choose to do that? See, that's something we need to discuss tomorrow, isn't it? Why would we know that something is good for us, and yet we still don't do it? Now, isn't that the definition of being crazy? Right?
No, it's the definition of being sad.
Well, Doesn't holding on to sadness make you crazy?
From God's perspective.
Of course it doesn't. It makes you make decisions that are not sound. Do you understand? And therefore motivated by a touch of madness. Yeah? But we'll talk about some of that.
I understood your perspective, what you're saying.
It's not my perspective.
Okay.
It's God's. Yeah. Fire up.
Are we created on the image of God? In what way?
Yeah, we need to talk about that a little bit too, don't we? So let's look at God's highest creation, which, believe it or not, is not the universe. It's your soul. So let's look at the highest creation, the human soul. Now that human soul was made in the image of God, in the sense that God is soul, right? But not in it doesn't have the same capabilities, characteristics as God's soul, in the sense of that it's infinite in its nature. God created us, human souls, to be finite in nature. So God's soul infinite, ours finite. God's love infinite, our love finite. God's kindness, compassion infinite, my kindness finite. God's power infinite, my power finite, like limited. Now, the only way I can grow from becoming a finite and limited being to become more infinite is by receiving a part of God's nature, receiving things from God. Love being the very first thing that I would need to receive. So God has designed our soul to be finite, but He's given it the capacity to grow beyond the finite capacity He created it with. But only if we choose to receive some of His infinite qualities. So the human soul, a finite creation, and without God would remain so. It would remain finite. Right? But it's been created in God's image, in the sense that it has many of the qualities and attributes of God's soul. And the reason why God created it like that is so that God could share some of those infinite attributes with the finite human, the limited human. And that means that we don't really know what the human soul is capable of once it starts receiving God's love. And there's, even to this day, nobody really knows how much of that love can be received and what that means for our future. Right? Of course, every celestial spirit in the spirit world knows how happy it is and how blissful it makes you and how much joy you experience, but they don't understand how much bigger they can get. They can only do that through experience. So a part of the experience of the human soul, the potential experience, is receiving gifts from the Creator. From the Creator's soul, and of course I haven't drawn these in perspective, have I? Because obviously Creator's soul infinite, and our finite soul created with finite capacity. And God created our soul with the ability to receive gifts from the infinite soul of God. And this enables then the finite soul to make changes that are beyond its natural position. So you could say this finite soul, we could call it the perfect natural man. So that's the label we gave it. I was the first person to give that label to it. And so the label I gave it was the perfect natural man. And what I mean by natural, right? What I mean by natural is that that's the limitation that we have if we remain that creature. We will never go beyond that. By the way, it's an amazing place to be that. So on earth, nobody experiences that because there's so much sin imbibed on earth that has degraded the natural man or woman into no longer being perfect. And now, because we've got so much sin, in other words, we've broken so many laws, and the consequences of those breaking of the laws is being felt by us. So that now means the soul is feeling the consequence of the breaking of those laws. And so we're no longer perfect, we're now quite degraded. Right? So the trouble with our perspective here on earth is we're meeting new people. You know, we met all of you today. We meet new people and we think we're all normal. You know? We're sort of, but we are degraded humans. You know, we're no longer the perfect natural man, right? That got, you know, this whole series of things that happened to us, some of which we'll talk about tomorrow, that happened to us that caused us to no longer be that creature. But the trouble is we're meeting each other and seeing ourselves in the mirror thinking we're pretty good, but actually we're just this degraded natural man, right? So we don't even have perspective enough to know that we're degraded. Does that make sense? For most of us, we don't even have that perspective. But in answer to your question, this perfect natural man, woman, it's actually a soul which is two halves of one person, you know, two halves. Your one half, your soulmate, the other half, makes the human soul. It's the soul that is being created in the image of God. It has only this as its future if God is not, if the soul isn't receiving qualities from God. That's its only future. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Jay. What is the God's wisdom in incarnating the souls in that state? I mean, it's like we're incarnating souls into the nut house, basically.
A nut house created by
us. But I have a problem with that because is it individual? Like each soul is sort of individual. How is it itself, in unconscious state, responsible for the collective?
So now that question is motivated by an emotion.
It is.
Yeah, and the emotion is, I feel it's unjust.
I'm angry.
Yeah.
Unjust.
I feel it's unjust. Now, you see, the difference between you and I is I don't feel it's unjust. And God doesn't feel it's unjust either. So why do you feel it's unjust is a part of the question that needs to be answered, doesn't it? Now, so what you're basically saying is that because this poor human soul is coming to this crappy place, this terrible place, you know, and let's feel sorry for that soul. Right? Now, we must first understand the purpose of God creating the process of incarnation, what the reason for incarnation is. You see, for you to become a self-aware being, of which this soul has the potential of doing, you have to have an experience. Now, what God did was God created a perfect world, a perfect earth, everything perfect, and two perfect humans, and put them there. And then he incarnated, he had the process, he actually involved himself in the incarnation of their souls to those two bodies that he created. He created two bodies, a spirit one for them and a physical one. He formed the first human couple, he formed directly, and he created the spirit body of each of them, and the physical body of each of them. And the spirit body and the physical body were created absolutely perfect. No flaws. Right? So this first human couple came and they had no flaws, absolutely perfect. But notice that it didn't stop them from sinning. Now that's an important thing to remember. Just because they had a perfect beginning, it didn't stop them from choosing sin.
So is it inevitable then? So if you create a creature with free will, is it inevitable for something like that to happen?
Yes.
So you have to then make it that way, and that's it. That's most economical. And
well, yeah. Let's firstly look at the process. Is it inevitable? Yes, is the answer to that. Yes.
Yeah, that's
because sooner or later, that person, through the exercise of their will, is going to start to experiment with breaking laws. Right? Now, if they are sensitive emotionally, and they're sensitive sexually, and they're sensitive physically, and they're sensitive spiritually, they would recognise they're breaking law. But if they're in a state where they're quite undeveloped, which is what a mum and a man were, because remember when they first came, they were like babies in adult body, right? So when they're in a state of being quite undeveloped, they're going to break law and maybe not be able to measure it, right? Not instantly, right? In the Bible, there is this quote in Genesis that once they sinned, they were barred from paradise, and it makes it seem like it was an instant reaction, right? But it wasn't. It was a gradual reaction, like all of our sins are on earth. There was a gradual reaction to our soul sinning, and in the process of a soul sinning, there's a gradual response around that occurs over time. And it requires a very sensitive and self-aware person to recognise that's actually occurring. So the first answer to the question, we need to go right back to a modern man and say, yes, it was inevitable that one of humanity eventually would decide to sin and also decide to experiment with breaking the law. Right? That was inevitable. God knew it was inevitable. Right? So God put everything on there perfectly to give us the best possible chance of it not happening. But God also knew that it would most probably happen. And in fact, God created a whole series of laws to correct it happening as well. So God's laws, many of them are about the correction of the human soul to bring it back to a state of perfection. But also God knows that in the exercise of your will, in other words, your choice and decision, has to be yours, not his. He can't force you. If he gives you free will, he can't ever at any point force you to make a different decision. The decision has to be your decision, right? So he also knew that even though he's created all these laws to redeem humans, it had to be your decision for your own redemption, right? And he also knew that the decision for your redemption was going to be at a different time and space, made to my decision for my redemption. I had to make my own decision. You have to make yours. Just want to grab a drink of water.
Can we have a wee break?
Sorry?
Can we have a wee break?
You want a toilet break too?
Yeah.
Should we 5-minute toilet break? Yeah. I want to continue with your question. Yeah. So 5-minute toilet break. Okay, how are we going? There's a bit of a line-up in the men's because there's a few breakdowns in the men's train. So. Unusual, yeah.
There was a picture of a woman in the men's.
Sisters are not semi-naked.
No, the men, they're all naked.
When I was entering, I almost said, "Oh, excuse me."
Excuse me.
Every German construction company, this is, or the other way around. You're facing this everywhere.
Really?
Yeah, it's really, and also Jakob definitely will say like in the carpentry or anything, in the bathroom, and even in the home, there's like naked talented women everywhere. It's really.
There's a lot of women very angry, and I sort of understand. Okay, we all back? Is there a few missing things? Yeah. No, a few missing. There's a bit of a line up in there. Yeah. Now I have to remember what we were
talking about being born into the crappy. It's not fair.
It's not fair.
So the first couple had a belly button?
Sorry? No, they didn't.
So basically what you're
They had no belly button, spirit body, or spirit, or
The one you want.
So we were answering, what was your name again?
Dan.
Dan. Your question about why are we born into a crappy world, really? Let's grab the mic, sorry.
Basically, the problem I'm having with it is in my lack of wisdom, and I'm thinking like, okay, let's incarnate souls. Maybe I would incarnate them on the 6th level of the spirit world or something like that, and they don't have to be incarnated on the 1st level. So and they're teachers to be other people from the 1st level, and also on top of that they have to like pull all the emotions from their parents and like surroundings and all the previous generations. So
so to solve this particular problem, if you think about trying to solve the problem, it's very complicated to solve the problem. Firstly, God did put the first human couple in a 6th sphere state on the earth. They were in a 6th sphere state on earth. They arrived on earth in a 6th sphere state, and the earth itself was in a 6th sphere state. So the actual spiritual environment of the earth when the first human couple arrived was in a 6th sphere state. So that in itself should indicate to us that God did what God felt was best, which was put the couple in the best possible environment for their education. Right? Now, if let's divorce the physical reality from the spirit world reality for a moment, because there's reasons why God put them in a physical earth rather than in a spirit earth, right? Because there are places in the spirit world where they could have been placed, right? But that would have stopped them having the opportunity to have children. You understand? And God wanted an automatic process to occur for the incarnation of children. And the only way for that to occur was for the parents to create the two bodies rather than God doing it anymore. So originally, God always does the most economical thing. The most economical thing was to incarnate the first two people on an earth, create their spirit body and their material body, but design in their material body and their ability to create another spirit body and a material body through the process of sexual intercourse. God wanted humans, God wanted you to have the experience of having children. Now that's for your education. God wanted that for your education. There's a lot of things you learn by having children. You learn what it's like to be a parent, right? You learn what it's like to love somebody and they don't love you back. You learn what it's like to give to them and they don't give anything back. You learn a lot of things about love being a gift if you have children. So God wanted you to have the experience of having children. It's also the most economical thing for you to create the body of the next incarnation
of the next incarnating souls. So God wanted you to have that experience. Now, the process of giving you that experience, which is part of your education, he also knew there were going to be potential problems with it, which he designed the laws to fix. So he put together a whole heap of laws that redeem you from making mistakes, can stop you from making mistakes. Those laws, of course, require some level of sensitivity. Now, he created the laws in many levels. You could divide the laws in terms of there is a hierarchy of law, but you could also say he divided the laws into some specific areas of your life. So you could say there's the physical area of your life. In other words, he defined laws that control how fast your limbs grow, the shape and size of them. There's mathematics that defines what your face looks like, what your arms and legs look like, why your internal organs come about. Many of them are genetically controlled, but also there's mathematics built into those genetics so that you end up in certain proportions, so you're not looking out of proportion. Your body has been designed in such a way that it is proportional to some mathematical formulas, which, by the way, many things in nature are also proportional to. And God designed those laws to control your physical development and also your physical life. So he designed a law like the law of gravity, which controls you staying on the planet rather than flying off of it. He did all of that so that you could have an experience. So his purpose for these laws was so that you could have a personal experience over time and learn. And he created like the perfect school, but it's also the perfect world for us to come into in order to learn a lot of things. So you could say the things we learn are physical, and then generally the next level of learning we have is sexual in nature. So by the time we're entering into our teenage years, we start developing sexually. So that causes us to trigger many desires in the soul that weren't there prior, and some of those desires are to find the other half. In other words, the desire for romance in your life. So he created these responses that occur in your body but also in your soul so that you can learn about romance, about love. So he designed these things too. And he created a whole heap of laws that govern those as well. And then he also created a whole set of laws that govern primarily your soul, the human soul itself, how you experience things through an emotional process. So you imagine if you had no emotions at all. It's hard to imagine. But imagine you had no emotions. I know humans are trying to have no emotions, but that's different to not having any. So imagine there's no emotion. So you've never in your entire life had a feeling of romance. You've never in your entire life had a feeling of love. Never in your entire life had a feeling of kindness. Never in your entire life had a feeling of happiness, joy, any of those feelings. None of those, because you had no feelings. There was no laws and also no capacity in the soul, imagine, to experience those things. Imagine what your life would be like. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Because you wouldn't even feel. So there would be no senses. Your body would have been created with no senses, even. But if you look at an animal, its body has senses, but there's no mechanism to feed into a soul that then has an awareness about those senses, right? So God created you with the ability to have senses, so you could, as a part of this physical, and also in part of your spiritual and also as your soul, there's this whole thing of senses that go on. The sense of sight, sense of hearing, touch, taste. These kind of senses give you an experience. And the beauty of the experience is it teaches you things. Yeah? That's one of the ways in which you have an experience. So your senses become important. And then there's also the aspect of what happens to you in your future, your idea or concept of self, your concept of others, your concept of the world, your understanding of whether there is a God or not, and all those things. You could call those your spiritual life, you could call that. He also created that for you. So in the process of doing all of these things, God gave you so many gifts. But if you think about your process of discovering them, can you see it's going to have to be gradual? It's like, you know, you're born a baby, there's physical senses. Am I a man? Even though we're in an adult skin, an adult flesh suit, as some people call it, and you would have, you still got physical senses. You would feel your weight on the ground. You can feel the touch of others and so forth. Now, it doesn't matter whether you were born a baby or as a man and a woman were, like incarnating as an adult, they are brand new to those senses. So they're just in the process of experiencing these senses. So you could say, when we described all these things when I was teaching in the first century, I tried to put all these things together and I called it a name, which was, it's a process of becoming self-aware, you could say, isn't it? The process of becoming, like, of beginning the process of learning about oneself, right? So we called it, you know, it's the incarnation process, which is the soul, unaware, coming to a form which allows it to go through these experiences in order to become aware. And so I called it the process of individualization. Right? So the process of individualization is this process where you begin unaware, and the moment you are incarnated, whether it was God doing it for the first human couple, or when you are conceiving a child, from that moment on, individualization has occurred. The actual act of individualization has occurred. And the reason why God had that happening on earth was so that you could have the gift of having a child. So it adds to your experience as a soul to understand and know what it's like to have a child. So you can understand and know what it's like to love someone without it being romantic love, right? But actually a love based on principle and desire for the welfare of the individual, right? If God didn't allow you to have that process, it was going to be more difficult for you to learn these things. So that's why God allowed these things to occur. But in the process of allowing that, it also gives you as the parent the opportunity to damage the child, doesn't it? Because you've got free will. So you could choose to love the child, or you can choose to damage the child, and you've got the option to do either, right? And unfortunately, most humans do damage their children, and oftentimes they're completely unaware of how, because we have very little sense of self-awareness that we've purposefully developed. Most of us just go through life having this experience, having that experience, and having that experience, not understanding that we're learning. We're just having this experience and having this experience and having this experience, thinking it's just all experiences really, but we're not understanding that we're actually learning to engage spiritual, emotional, sexual and physical senses. And we're learning how to use them. Right? Now God created the ability for you to do that, but in the process of giving you free will, you could do that in harmony with the Creator's law or out of harmony with the Creator's law. And that's where our problems begin. Now, God can't then go, if he wants to be economical, can't go like he's not going to rub out what you choose to do for the sake of the next generation. Because to do that, he'd be rubbing it out on every generation. He would have to do it on every generation. He wants humans to learn we need to take responsibility. This is a part of our spiritual senses that we need to develop. That we need to take responsibility ourselves for our own creations. And if we have done damage, we need to undo that damage. If we have taken the action to destroy something, we need to take the action to fix it. If we have done damage to our own soul, we need to fix what damage we chose to do. God's not going to fix that for us. There's not going to be any Messiah come along who fixes it for you. This is what a lot of people want. This is how the Christian faith got established, because everyone was told, we're all sinners, don't worry, you can continue sinning, and there's going to be one person comes along and his blood's going to pay for it all. Like, the harm to him will pay for all of your sin. That was the concept. And a lot of us like that concept because it means that I don't have to be responsible for paying for my own sin. It's not true. We are all personally responsible for our own sin. And you can see why, because God wants you to learn that He also, this is one of the things that He wants us to learn, and that is, if I sin, there are consequences, and I can fix them. And I've been created a powerful enough being to fix them. I've been created a powerful enough being to reverse the effects of my sin. You see, a lot of human religions that have been created, all of which are mostly false, right? And a lot of those religions have been created with the idea that you're a sinner and you forever will be. In other words, it's disempowering you right from the beginning of your life to think that whatever you start out with, you're going to end up with, or worse, right? And that's not true. None of that's true. The truth is, God's created you with this gift of free will, which says, I can undo the bad decisions I make, but I have to choose to do it myself. You follow? It has to be me making that decision, not for myself, not for you. You need to make the decision for you. I need to make the decision for me to undo the effects of my sin. Okay? So we come across to here, and then work our way back.
Is God supporting us in this process with some additional forces?
Of course. Like, God doesn't just say, you're on your own now. You know, like, if you were a parent looking after a child and the child, become wayward, become doing some things wrong, would you stand back and just go, you've made your own mistakes, so be it, and not want to help them? If you love them, you'd want to help them, would you, to overcome that? So yes, God has put into place many things. Of course, the law, the big expression of His personality is one of those things that He's put in place to correct you. But He's also put in place mechanisms by which you can get help from others. There are people in the spirit world who are now developed because they've been there for 150,000 years or less, depending on how long they've been there. And they can share with you their experience and they can help you overcome the same things I've had to overcome. God's also put in place natural things that might also cause you to come into contact with experience of love on earth. And as Mary pointed out to me in the break also, God's also on earth in particular given you this sort of very gentle, compassionate way of making adjustments, rather than by the time you hit the spirit world, it's a bit more forceful. So if a person doesn't make the adjustments on earth where everything is quite, I would call it almost relaxed in terms of how God's enforcing the law on earth. The law is still being enforced, but there's a lot of compassion in the way it's being enforced, and you only have to make small adjustments before you get quite big rewards. So in the spirit world, if you haven't made those changes on earth, now, obviously you need extra force. There's extra law force placed upon you as limitations in the spirit world. But even then, not without help. There's other people who've been through the same experience. There's also an inbuilt mechanism of the soul, actually, that God created, this soul. And we talked about this last week with Belgium, with the mechanism of the conscience, which is a mechanism that God created where the two halves of the soul could utilise the mechanism. I've drawn it as two mechanisms, but it's actually one. It belongs to the whole soul, this mechanism. And it allows the Creator to share truths with you directly if you so desire. The problem is that there's a terrible lack of education on earth about these things. Does that make sense? On earth, there's no education provided about how to use the soul-based mechanisms. Now, that again is a direct result of choices on earth. The truth about it has been available for thousands of years, and yet the average person knows nothing about them. Right? So that is indicative of the fact that many of us don't have a desire to actually know. Given the fact that the truth is available, it means many didn't have a desire to know. What brought you here? It was your desire to know. Does that make sense? You had enough open-heartedness and enough open-mindedness to make a decision and go, maybe this guy who says he's Jesus and everybody thinks he's crazy is not so crazy after all, and maybe he's got some truths, and maybe I should go along and listen and just see whether they're true or not. Right? Now, we all have that potential experience with every truth that's out in the universe. You know, a lot of them may seem quite out there, but we've got to allow ourselves to be open-hearted and open-minded enough to discover new things. So obviously you guys are, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But many aren't, because many just live their life automaton, or on automatic. But God's created these beautiful parts of you, even your conscience, but also helpers from outside to help you to learn how to use these things, how to use everything that you've been given as a gift. He's done that. So the way I've approached my life is that it's all like an experiment, yeah. But it's also a joyful experiment. Many of us approach it like it's a really hard experiment, but it actually can be a joyful experiment, and no matter what pain you experience, actually.
Before we move on, can I answer that?
Mary wants to say.
Like with Dayan's question, I really understand that, like, when you're confronted with pain that you feel is in you as a result of other people's free will choices, that often there's this triggered feeling of like, this is unjust, I didn't do anything and here it is in me. But my understanding from God is that, you know, God wants us to understand that the gift of our free will is very, very powerful. You know, and so even part of you recognizing there's pain in me that came from someone else's use of their free will is, or if you kind of, the problem is a lot of us get very unhumble about our pain, and so then we get stuck on it. We get stuck on that thing of like, oh, here I am with this pain and I don't want to feel it, and so it's somebody else's fault, and this is how this injustice feeling perpetuates itself. But if we're able to experience our pain, we understand, wow, that's very powerful, the free will gift that I have. Look at the impact that everyone has. Look at the impact it's had on me. I also have that gift. How
and I also have impact on others.
I'm impacting others. And also, as we go through that process, we learn, yeah, this is a pretty powerful gift I have, free will, because I can use my free will not only to release my pain, which seemed insurmountable before, and look, I did it. So wow, this is a pretty powerful thing, but also I understand, what can I create with this free will? It must be pretty powerful. And every spirit who's even in the 6th sphere, the 7th sphere, even the 5th sphere, understands what I do with this will has a lot of impact on myself and the people around me. And God really wants us to learn that lesson. So even in the misuse of free will, which creates pain and suffering, if we're sensitive, if you think about it as a parent, if you're sensitive, you're going to recognize that and go, oh, wow, my free will is harming another person. But even if you're not, and you are the child who's having to face the pain that's, you know, come to you through generations, if you can be humble to that pain, you understand, wow, I'm pretty powerful. Like, that didn't even stop me, that pain. You know, I got rid of that, and I can create good things with this will. So God wants you to know how powerful you are. It's very powerful. Yeah.
microphone back there. Yeah.
Just here.
And I'm guessing you see it from the other side. And when you experience it
Yeah.
on yourself, you've seen it from the other side, so it's much faster to learn.
Yeah, it's like you can really say there's a number of different ways of learning, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can observe other people making mistakes, and you can go, I need to not make the same mistakes because I can see that mistake. You know, you observe a man beating up a woman, and you see the damage it has to the woman. You go, I'm not going to beat up a woman ever, right? So if you see your own father beating up your mother, you would go, I'm never going to do that to a woman ever, wouldn't you? Because you'd see the damage to your mother. So that's an external experience that you didn't have to have to see and learn something. Or you're going to have to do it yourself. So you're going to have to go through the personal experience yourself if you don't learn from your environment. And most of us are choosing to have our personal experiences, even though it's quite obvious that the same personal experience with thousands of others, millions of others, is not working for them. Now, many of us sort of feel like, I'll try the same thing, but it should be a different result for me because I'm me. And I'm nicer than they are, or you know, I'm better than they are, or whatever. I'm more intelligent than they are, or I'm cleverer than they are. And so that, even though I'm doing the same thing as they're doing, it won't affect me, is the general feeling many of us have. Only to find in our future that it does. And so many of us are not capable, unfortunately, of learning from other people's experiences. We've got to learn from our own. But also learning from your own experience is a very powerful tool for your future. Because as you learn from your own experience, you are most probably going to learn, and then once you have some awareness of what you've learned, it's highly unlikely you'll do the same damaging things again.
You can see that this is why humility is such an important quality for us to develop, because you can see that if you begin to release the pain of your own childhood early in your life, there's many decisions you won't make because you'll understand the gravity of it. You know, but most of us don't do that, and then we start making our own mistakes, and then we have further opportunities. And this is the grace that I was talking to Jesus about in the break. You know, there's a lot of grace here on earth, that laws are operating, but there's a lot of opportunities for us to correct course continually, you know. Yeah.
Yep. And just at the back, yeah. And then we come down to Olga. So if you else, Olga,
if you just leave your hand
up there, else. So right back.
Hello. Yeah, I'm just a little bit confused. I think I saw on one of your early videos that you said that it's actually the parents or the adults that attract the soul.
Yes.
But so it's sort of going to the point of being born into a crappy world and also free will. If the soul itself doesn't have any choice where it's born into, you know, on this world we get a lot of different situations. You know, there's children trying to earn a living on Indian
rubbish tips.
Rubbish tips. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then where was it going with that? Yeah, and also, sorry, when you pass and you're sort of floating around in the spirit world somewhere, like yourself,
which you're not doing,
Mary, and other people who've come back to Earth, you know.
When you say come back to Earth, you mean...
Well, you've come back to Earth, you say you're Jesus and Mary.
Yeah, but not reincarnated.
Is it the same soul that you have as Jesus?
Yep.
Yeah, so in that respect, your soul chose to come back here, or was it simply your parents that brought you back here?
No.
Who's doing the choosing, or is it a combination
Good question,
of both?
yeah. The same question was asked in Belgium, actually. In your first incarnation, the incarnation of the soul is an instinctual process. So God created amongst all of God's creatures, you know, so you think of birds, animals, and also, obviously, this human form is an animal form, isn't it? The physical body part of it is an animal form. So if we look at the half of the soul, my half is the male half, and then I've got a male spirit body, which looks like a man, and a male physical body, you know, that has all the appendages of the male. So this male half of the soul, when it incarnates, It's an instinctual process. It has to incarnate in order to be individualized. So how it incarnates is governed by many what are called laws of attraction. Those laws of attraction, because this soul, so back in the 1st century when I first incarnated, my soul didn't determine who was my mum and who was my dad. What determined who was my mum and dad was the environment that I was born into, conceived into, my mum and dad's emotional states that needed to be corrected, along with some of my mum and dad's states that didn't need correction but were a part of their nature and their personality. And where my soul goes is the best for my soul as well as for their souls in terms of development. But it's not determined by me, it's determined by law. Right? Now, what happens after them is determined by choice, and particularly the choices of my parents. So for me, in the 1st century, my father chose to be quite abusive with me. I was quite frequently yelled at, screamed at, belted, as a child in the 1st century. And also, when I was very, very young, I was sent to a military school in Egypt, and for nearly 2 years I was tortured there, right, at my father's agreement. Right? When I say tortured there, they had physical ways of forcing children to learn military aspects of life, swords, spears, shields, using all of these things that my father believed. He thought I was the Messiah, and so he believed that I would be the leader of Israel. He thought I'd be the king of Israel, and he thought that I would need the skills to be able to boss men around, and I would need the skills to be able to control people, and I'd need to learn violence. And so he purposefully sent me to a school to learn violence. Yeah, and a part of that school, violence included things like raping women and all sorts of things. Now, I didn't do those things, but I got badly tortured for not doing them because they thought that I wasn't malleable enough, right? And so that was my father. That was my father in the 1st century. He had a very strong feeling I was a Messiah, and he wanted to make me into it. Was his feeling. Now, many of your parents have a similar feeling towards you, right? Now, when I observed all of that, I didn't blame God for that. In my 1st century incarnation, I didn't blame God for that. I blamed my dad for that. Right? He made those choices and decisions. But the problem many of us are doing in this argument we have with God, we would prefer to blame God for what we believe is create an imperfect system, when actually it's a perfect system being destroyed by the free will of humans. Right? In other words, the free will of humans being exercised unlovingly is going to eventually affect any system because of the power of the human. It's going to affect any system that occurs, even if it was created perfect. It's going to affect it. Our unloving actions are going to affect that system. God wanted us to learn that. He wanted us to learn that if we choose to be unloving individuals, it is going to affect the perfect system and destroy it. But he also created that this earth wasn't our only experience, which is very important to our future, because if we have a terrible existence on earth because of the choices of others, and in the 1st century my whole life was ended because of the choices of others. I wanted to live with Mary until I was, a few hundred years old at least on earth. As it turned out, I married Mary, and 18 months later I was murdered. Right? That was because of the choices of others. But as soon as I arrived in the spirit world, my development of love meant that I could go to places that no human had ever been before. Right? So God also created a compensatory system for the fact that humans would choose to do unloving things. And that compensatory system lasts for tens of thousands of years, not just 70. or 80. But again, on earth, we don't have perspective. And part of having perspective is time perspective of time. On earth, we think this is the only life, this is my only experience. Having 80 years of bad experience, or in my case in the first century, a lot of my first century experience, I was tortured when I was between 5 and 7. I was tortured again in my teenage years by a group of teenagers and a dog. And then when I was 19, I was almost killed through torture again. And then I was also tortured to death. In between that time, there were 4 attempts on my life as well, right? So this all happened to me in the first century. None of it's written about, but it all happened to me. Now, in the process of that happening to me, I could have said, right, I'm going to be just as evil as everyone around me. You know, this is all unfair. All this violence is terrible. I'm going to learn to be violent and be violent to others. Or, as I did do, I saw, actually, I don't like this violence. This violence feels terrible towards myself and towards my person. It actually helped me feel like I would never commit that level of violence towards another by having these experiences. Now, I'm not saying that God wanted me to have those experiences, because God didn't. God created a perfect human world where a man and a man incarnated, and he also, and by this stage, by the way, I didn't know how I'd managed to have a chat with him about it, right, because of my spiritual development at the time. And so I knew that there was this pristine earth, and humans had destroyed it. Humans had destroyed the system God had made through the exercise of their will. Now, it was very important for me to also learn that through the exercise of my will in a loving direction, I could do the opposite. I could change the world. Right? And to this day, my name is known, even though most people on earth don't recognise it as me. But to this day, my name is known as somebody who did that 2,000 years later. Right? And that's because I made the choice to actually be a loving individual, because I could feel God's intention was not the world we were in, but rather a different world. Right? And I needed to live in harmony with that. So a lot of the experiences that we start to reason about when it comes to our feelings about God, and really what many of you are expressing is your anger with God now. And you don't realise it, but these are areas that you're angry with God about. So you hear the truth being we incarnate, there's no choice of the soul incarnating, it's all governed by law, and you hear all that truth, and then you go, what about the person in India? What about all these people? But God's put in place corrections, all of those things over time. But most of us don't have any perspective at all. So an example of perspective is, some of the friends that I have now in the spirit world were actually on the Sanhedrin, and they chose to kill me in the first century. But I knew in time they'd eventually listen to the truth. That's perspective. Right? The perspective that things change, that people change. The perspective that given enough time, many people will actually make choice to be more loving. That's having perspective. Now, I want to finish this answer, because in the process of making that decision to have perspective and to also allow to make some individual choices of my own, it doesn't really matter in a way. And when I say it doesn't matter, of course God cares, and also I care, but at the end of the day, the individualization process has occurred the instant this soul is conceived, incarnates onto the earth. The instant that it happens, this soul is now individualized. Once the soul is individualized, it can even pass in the womb without having experience, which, by the way, is the worst thing that could happen to the soul, because it has no experience in its gestation period. Right? It's better if it does have one. But even the very worst thing that could happen, which is that, not having any experience at all here, it will still be able to grow, still be able to learn about itself, still be able to learn the universe. It'll all happen in the spirit world, of course, rather than on earth, but it will still happen. Right? So the process of individualization, which was a question asked, occurs the way it does now to give you the opportunity and gift of being a parent. That's the reason why God chose to incarnate you here rather than him actually dish you out a spirit body in the spirit world. Do you understand? So each of you could end up with the experience of being a mother and a father, which, if any of you have done it, know that it's quite an interesting experience, isn't it? Don't you find that? Who of you have had children? Yeah? Haven't you found it to be a very interesting experience? Haven't you learnt a lot from it? Right? So God's given you that gift so that you could do that. Now, in the process of giving you gifts, he's also giving you a knife, really, as an example. Every gift that is given to you also has the power to cause some damage. Every gift. You think about it. Any gift I give you will have the power to cause you damage. I give you a car. You could drive it off the cliff. You could drive it into somebody else. It's going to cause damage. You could run somebody over with it. It can cause you damage. If I give you a knife, you can cut up some fruit with it, or you can stab yourself with it, or stab someone else with it. Every gift that is possible to create. I give you a house, right? It could fall down on you because I didn't design it well. But if I really designed it well and give you a house, right, there's a good chance that you'll live in it the rest of your life potentially, right? But you could choose to misuse it, couldn't you? You could, there's a support structure there, and you could choose to cut through it with a chainsaw. Wouldn't be very good, but you can choose to do it. And this is the thing, we all need to come to terms with the power of our will. Right? And God's given you this experience in order for you to do that. Now, if that child goes into, like India, well, like Mary and I were watching a show just briefly a few days ago about people, it was people from England who went to Ghana to see what it's like to work in a gold mine, right? Because a lot of people in the West have gold everything on, right? I don't wear any jewellery myself, but a lot of people like it, and so they want gold, right? So they want to get bling. I'm not sure why. I hate the feeling of anything on my body myself, but they want bling. So, but they don't understand the effect of the use of their will, which is, in Ghana, little children by the stage of 5 starting to work in gold mines, right? And the whole families are working in gold mines all of their life, every day, going through lots and lots of pain. We talked about this in Belgium with regard to chocolate, right? Now, those of us in the West in particular, like a bit of chocolate now and then. But when you look at the choices we're making and the effects it's having on people who are actually harvesting and growing that chocolate, it's actually very, very damaging to their life. One chocolate bar, whole day's labour, and the average person there gets one, the equivalent of about $1 Australian dollar, which is about half a US dollar to $1 US. For a whole day's labour. And of course they don't have, houses like we have, and they don't have cars, and they don't have any of these things because, they walk around bare feet and have only got one set of clothes, and, tomorrow I'll wear a different t-shirt, but they won't. And it's all because of the choices we make, right? In terms of we want it at a certain price, and the companies want to make profits, and they want shareholders, and all these other things, but no one's considering the poor person actually growing the stuff and the effect on the environment and all those things, right? So this is the thing we need to come to realise. It's the use of our will that is the problem here. It's not what God created. It's the use of our will, what we just chose to do with what God created, that is the problem. And we need to learn to fix our own problems. But the majority of us completely ignore our problems, and not only that, go so far as to blame God for them. Which, if you think about it, isn't very fair, given the fact that God gave us the best possible start. Not only that, wants us to correct it. Not only that, made a whole heap of laws to correct it. Not only that, provided a spirit world to compensate for everything we do here. Like, he's done so many things, but he's asking you to do something, which is live in harmony with the Creator's world. Make sense? So, back there.
A question to you. What happened to you is how did you, or was there a point where you decide to choose love and not the violence?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing in the first century that made me choose love rather than violence was the fact that I allowed myself to feel what it was like to be on the receiving end of violence. To really feel it, like to grieve it, to really feel what it was like to be attacked and, belittled and then of course even more extreme, like put into places where you physically were harmed and so forth. I allowed myself to feel it. In the process of feeling it, the biggest feeling that developed in me was I don't ever want to do that to anybody else.
Can you qualify that actually by saying you felt it, but you attributed the effect to the correct cause?
Yeah, I didn't blame myself for it.
You didn't blame yourself, you didn't blame society, you said this is...
Well, what I blamed was the sin in society. What I could start to see was if my father wanted to, belt me and everything, and then he wanted to put me into a military college, if you want to call it that. It was actually run by some ex-Roman soldiers who were quite violent and also quite dark and like malevolent. And if he wanted to do all of that, and I, was forced to go there. There was no choice. I was only 5 anyway, and it was forced to go there. So if he wanted to do all of that, I could see, that meant that he had some problems. I didn't see I had problems coping. I thought, because I didn't cope. Like when I say I didn't cope, I cried almost every day there for 2 years, right? I handled it in the sense of dealt with it, but I didn't come out toughened up. In fact, if anything, because I allowed myself to feel, I come out more soft and going, I'm never going to do that to anybody again myself. I'm never going to do that myself. And I'm never going to agree with anybody doing it to anybody else either.
You didn't call it human nature.
I didn't call it human nature. It was human malevolence. Evil. It was evil, what was done. Yeah? So you've got to name the thing for what it is.
The problem on earth is that we very often misconstrue, like we blame ourselves, or we say, oh, well, that's how it is, or we don't, even if we feel, sometimes we don't really grieve what it's actually about.
Yeah. Straight behind.
The truth.
When you were there and you knew the next day probably some bad thing was going to happen
every day,
how did you have the faith to not go into a desperation and to keep going, that it's going to stop someday? Or
by this stage, it caused me to start to feel about God, like whether God existed and what God's nature would be, and and every time I felt about God, I felt this sort of very loving presence, and also love for me. And the love that I felt for me, and even though I was very young, but the love I felt for me, I basically spent a lot of my life in that period of my life sort of just feeling about spiritual things. And in a way, I was zoning out of what happened physically, in terms of detuning from my teaching to a degree from my physical body, but I was also learning how to control my physical senses. It's one reason why I didn't experience any pain when I was crucified, because by that stage I'd learnt to experience pain without feeling it. Right? I've learnt to control the physiological responses of my body, including my nervous system, by that stage. So it helped me in my future to develop these qualities that I had later. But I didn't know that at the time. It was just something that I decided to do. It's hard to. I could see that the people around me were deciding the opposite. So all of the boys, there were about 120 boys who had all been sent by their fathers, and they weren't mostly Jews. They were different religions, and most of them were Egyptians actually, fathers who sent their sons to the same school, because we were living in Alexandria, which is in Egypt at the time. But as a result, many of them I could see were choosing to do the very thing the soldiers were getting them to do, right? Out of agreement and acceptance and a lot of other things. And I could see how, like, the choice to do the wrong thing began sort of in small ways and led to bigger ways. You know, when we first started the school, there was all just this sort of words that were all used to try and toughen up the kids. But then those words turned into actions, and then those actions turned into abuse, and then the abuse oftentimes turned into torture. It was a gradual process which the Roman army used to desensitise all of their soldiers for warfare. And that process was being engaged by the leaders of this school, if you wanted to call it that. It's sort of like more like a compound. But and I could see, even at a young age, that it was destroying everybody. And I could let it destroy me or not. Now at this stage, unbeknown to me, I had some relationship to God, but I didn't understand it. I wasn't aware of it, but it helped me develop more of a relationship with God that I became aware of, because I wanted somebody to help me, to get out of it. And I couldn't see any person on earth doing it. My own dad wasn't going to do it. My mother wasn't going to do it because she was too afraid of my dad. Eventually, what happened was the school, you could say the principals, but really what they were violent Roman soldiers, met with my father and said I was untrainable. And they said to him that if I stayed there, I would die. And they asked him whether they wanted that for me, right? Because I was so resistive to everything by that stage. When I say resistive, I refused to do pretty much everything, right? And every time there was violence because I refused, right? And in the end, they said, because of the strength of my will, they said they'd have to kill me to get, and I still wouldn't do what they wanted. They recognised that, but it took them 2 years to recognise they'd have to kill me, and they still wouldn't get me to do what they wanted. And so they met with my father and told him that they were going to have to kill me to get, and even then I was still not going to do what they wanted. What was my dad going to do about that? And my dad decided to take me out. That's what happened. But only because they learned that my will was unbreakable. And in that time, by this stage I was 7. I knew my will was unbreakable. Right? Now I had some advantages in the first century. And one of the advantages was I didn't inherit the sins of my father and my mother. Now, in this life it's been a very different experience. Like, it's taken me to this age to realise my will is unbreakable. Right? But in the first century, by the time I was 7, I knew it was unbreakable. The beauty of knowing that and the power that gives you as an individual immense. I knew I could handle anything. I could handle it emotionally. I could handle anything happening to my body. I could handle anything happening emotionally to me, and I was unbreakable. It's a great thing to know about yourself. Yeah. Franz? Where is the mic that was here? Olga was next anyway. So.
I just wanted to ask, because you knew that people were doing painful things to you.
That was wrong.
Yeah, that was wrong.
Yeah.
But how was it possible for you to not judge them? Because I think it's a different thing that you know someone does something wrong.
Well, in the process of them doing it, they demonstrated to me that it had been done to them. You see, these men running this school were Roman soldiers, and they were retired, but they were Roman soldiers, and all of them, they, you know, in the process of their yelling and screaming at you, they tell you things about themselves, right? And one of the things they tell about themselves was their own experience of the same indoctrination, the same abuse. And, you know, one day you might get a chance of talking to Cornelius, one of our friends, and he will tell you he was taken from his parents at the age of 3 and put into one of these schools, right? And he became a Roman soldier, he became a centurion in the end. But it was through years and years of malevolent abuse. You follow? And so I could, you know, they told me that. They told me as if it was good. You know, they're telling me their experience of this happened to me, and this, you know, like, you know, I'm doing this to you because this is how I learned, that kind of thing. And in the process, they told me a lot about themselves, and that is that I should have compassion for them. Because they are these damaged adults who had murdered, you know, hundreds of people, but who had grown from these children that were taken from their parents out of a loving environment into this terribly malicious, hateful environment, and that's all they knew. And they had no capacity to reverse it. Like, when I say no capacity, these people had no self-reflection. They just thought, what happened to me? I'm going to visit on the next generation. Many of you have done the same with your own children. What happened to me? I'm either going to choose to not or choose to visit on my children. You know, and these guys said this was good, hardening you up, ready, getting you ready for the reality of war, right? The reality of fighting for a country. Yeah. And very violent, of course, but the reality was that they had also experienced the same as what they were doing to me, and even a bit worse, really, because most of them were taken as children. Like, when I say not 5-year-old, I mean 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, taken from their families and put into service. By the time they became teenagers, all of them were in military service. When I say teenagers, as soon as they had the height of an adult, so for most people that's like between 13 and 15, they were now in the army. But they had had 10 years. The reason why the Romans were such a huge military force was because they did this. They desensitized generations of children to enter the army, to fight for Rome. And they gifted them with citizenship as a reward, if you survived.
Jen, can you also say, I sort of feel from a scientific perspective, judgment is a mechanism we use to prevent emotion?
Our own.
Our own emotion, yeah. So
it's a way of externalising your own experience, judgment. It's a way of saying they're like, not just that they're at fault, because I could see these men were at fault, right? But also that they're substantially worthless is really what judgment is saying. When you judge another, you're saying they're worth less than you. And I couldn't say that about these guys. No matter what evil they were perpetrating, I could feel that they were just kids, really, in these violent adult constructs that they had learnt through their entire life, and they didn't even have the adult development to see they were doing the wrong thing. So it's hard to judge someone like that, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, if you stayed there for 2 years with so much humility, it must have been quite a powerful effect as well for the educators. I mean, it must have been really kind of hard.
It
for
had a
them.
powerful effect on them in the sense they couldn't, coming to terms with the fact that they had to kill me and they still couldn't get me to do what I wanted. See, normally with any child that they'd come into contact with up until that point, and by the way, both of them men are now celestial spirits.
Of course.
Right, so, but because of all of this that happened, right, but they realised at this point that my will was unbreakable, and as a result of being unbreakable, they would have to kill me, and then of course they were getting paid by my father to educate me, and of course if they killed me, you know, Dad's not going to be too impressed, right? So that's why they eventually had a discussion with my father about it. Yeah. You understand?
Yeah.
I don't want to labour this, it's just an experience I had, but I'm trying to share with you the principle that I'm not to blame for how you use your will, but I am responsible for how I use mine.
But at the same time, it reminds the others of how wrong they are doing if there is like one kind of right person, and it's actually quite painful within them.
Yes.
Even if they distance.
It's
from
partially
their
why
own
they got so
consciousness.
violent, is because it was a reminder they were doing the right thing towards will. But also, it was also the reason why I was eventually removed from the situation.
Of course.
Yeah, so eventually, upholding love, I was automatically removed from the situation, even though the result could have been different, right? And that's happened to me all my life in the first century, and through this one actually, where I've been removed from situations. Once I've learnt the lesson of love, situations automatically stop and things change. Yeah. Yeah. So back to Alex, and then back to Maya.
So it's actually a powerful example of how what will can do with those guys being now in the celestial realm.
That's right. Again, perspective of time. Yeah. This is something that I learnt a lot in the first century, was having the perspective of time, and sometimes not even in the first century, but afterwards. Like, you know, my father and mother. My father, he was on the Sanhedrin, but he wasn't a part of the he wasn't there the evening of my accusal and the decision to, you know, give me to the Romans to kill me. But he was on the Sanhedrin. He fundamentally agreed with the religious construct of the day that I was actually in complete disagreement with. And so, you know, my father didn't change until after I died. Some of my brothers didn't change till after I died. Most of my family rejected me before my death, and it was only really my mother who accepted me before my death in the first century. And even then, she often used to go around saying to people I'm nuts. She did. She, you know, on 2 occasions, she prevented me from getting murdered by just telling everyone that I was crazy. And because she told them that I was crazy, and she was my mother, they listened to her and prevented my death. They didn't kill me, but they only didn't kill me because they thought I was crazy. So I was teaching all of these fundamental things about the human soul, God, relationship with God, and also quite confrontational about the world, the religion I was in at the time, or the religion everybody else was in at the time. And so naturally everyone's pretty upset with me, and if they could believe I was crazy, then they could sort of explain it away without having to kill me for it. So on 2 occasions that happened. And one time I nearly got thrown off a cliff, and my mother said I was just crazy. What are you doing? She stood in front of them. You know, she was on the edge of the cliff, standing in front of them, yelling at them, saying, "She's crazy! Can't you see she's crazy?" You know, like, and eventually the whole body of people calmed down and said, "Oh, the poor fella is crazy! Like, and he thinks he's the Messiah. He's just nuts, right?" And so they let me go. Yeah, but I didn't really like being called crazy all the time. right? But also I could see my mum, she was afraid. She was afraid of me dying. She didn't understand there was a life afterwards, so I did. I wasn't concerned about it, you see. This is one reason why she thought I was crazy, because I wasn't concerned about my death. And she was. Far more concerned about my death than I was. As I suppose many of you mothers are about your children, oftentimes you're far more concerned about their death than they are. Because many of them are connected to the fact that they have a spirit body and can leave, at any time. So, oftentimes we're, as parents, more afraid than our children are.
Can I ask an additional question?
Yeah.
Which indicates you weren't afraid of feeling.
That's right. I wasn't afraid of feeling.
Was this a quality God gave to you, or you developed?
You could say it was a quality I was free to develop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because of not getting the inheritance of your parents.
The inherited sin from our parents, yeah. Many of you don't realise that, but the major inherited sin from your parents is the feeling that you can't cope with your feelings.
Can you say that again?
One of the major inherited sins from your parents is the feeling that you can't handle your feelings. You can't cope with them. That's a huge sin that gets handed down from generation to generation, and I didn't have it.
Where does braveness come into this?
Sorry, where does
braveness?
Courage and bravery are qualities I feel that happen. The more of a relationship with God I had, the less worried I was about my person. I came to have, and once I became a one with God, obviously that was the truth, but even before then, I came to have the feeling that God loves me, God cares about me, I know I have a spirit body, I know I have a spirit life, and people can kill my body, but it's not going to stop my life. Right? So, can you see, to me, truth enables bravery.
And it's also information you had.
Yeah. You see, the main reason why we're afraid is because we don't know the truth. Right? And so the main reason why the average person on earth is afraid of dying, for example, is because they don't know the truth of what's afterwards. Because if you knew the truth and you actually felt the truth of what's afterwards, you wouldn't be so afraid of it. Right? You wouldn't purposely do it because you knew that would be an act of will against your body. But if it happens, you're not going to go, oh, isn't it terrible? Most of you don't realise that for many people who pass, there's not even any pain in the process. Often the worst experiences on earth is the pain you have leading to your death.
Resisting death.
Like cancers and other diseases like that eat your body away, which are actually a lot about what's happening emotionally to yourself. These forms of death are far more painful than actually dying.
Wouldn't you say that resistance is the actual pain you have? I mean, not the actual pain, but it's more painful.
But all resistance is caused by fear, and all fears are based on untruths. So fundamentally, it's because we don't know or feel the truth that these things happen. Okay? So it's very important to understand this in your progress, right? Because if you can understand that you as a soul, you've been given this beautiful world to actually experience and learn about yourself and learn about life, and in particular learn about your will, learn about how to use your will. And you start developing what I call spiritual qualities. So spiritual qualities, things like faith, humility, truth, love, compassion, understanding, kindness. You could say the fundamental spiritual qualities are humility, truth, love, and faith, right? And responsibility. It's sort of like the fundamental qualities. And then linked with every one of those qualities, they all have intricate parts to them. Like, an example of that is truth. Let's look at truth. Well, there's sub-qualities of truth, which are transparency, openness, freedom of expression, freedom of delivery, honesty in delivery. So not just thinking true, but being true. acting true.
Expressing yourself.
Expressing yourself truly.
Not just speaking words,
yeah.
but being.
Being yourself truly. These are all aspects of truth. And so the more and more developed you become, the more you realise that every one of these fundamental qualities has all of these beautiful sub-qualities, I would call them, but it's hard to describe them really, that are all very much fundamentally a part of your future existence, if you make them be. You know, but that's going to require your will to do. It's not. It requires your becoming more self-aware, becoming more humble, becoming more desirous, using passion to drive your life in a direction that's loving. You know? And then when you do that, you learn a lot of things, and you then can express yourself with what you've learned, and then affect others positively through what you learn as well. Okay? So yes, it's a very important thing to realise that even what you call your fears is just an unacceptance of a truth. It's not accepting a truth in your heart. And many of us have been educated to do that as children, and of course as adults we now need to uneducate ourselves in that direction. But unfortunately, if you think about the possibilities for humanity, if you were educated on the fundamental parts of your nature, and then you were also educated about the thing called the conscience, which I just listed, and then you were educated about humility, love, truth, and faith as major qualities, as well as self-responsibility. People, if you're educated about those things, and this happened, that it started happening the day you went to school. You were 5 years of age. Do you think by the time you're 15, you'd have a pretty good understanding of the world, wouldn't you? And also a pretty good understanding of what makes you happy, what brings you joy, right? If these things were educated to you right from the beginning. But see, humans put so much emphasis, and it's something we need to discuss maybe after lunch, right? We put so much emphasis on developing the mind of the child, you know, in mathematics, in language, in sciences and so forth, which are all very interesting. But fundamentally, those things won't bring us a lot of joy compared to these things if we understood them. We spend so much time educating the mind before we educate about these things. So unfortunately, we get to the stage where we don't really, we're like 30 and we don't really understand any of these things really. And we're like 50 and we don't understand. And unfortunately for many of us, if we're not careful, we'll be 100 and dead in the spirit world and still not understanding. Right? And that's because we could take different opportunities as people on earth and educate children from a young age about these things. But of course it's going to require a big change, isn't it? Right, en masse, big change to do that. But imagine how great it would be. A world where every child understood their physical self, sexual self, emotional self, their senses and the use of their senses and spiritual development. They understood the quality of humility, love, truth, faith and self-responsibility, and they knew how to act in harmony with them. Do you think by the time you're 7 years of age there'd be bullying in schools? It'd be very hard, wouldn't it? And now none of these things are educated. So by the time we're in our 60s and 70s, I'm 61 now, and by the time we're my age now, we're still pretty clueless. And we still are not happy oftentimes, not content with our life, quite disappointed with it, don't know how these things function really. We start having degradation of our body, and we've already lived a lot of our life, and yet we haven't enjoyed a lot of it. Which is the result, fundamentally, of not respecting truth that comes from the Creator. It's fundamentally because I don't believe God's real, really real. I don't believe God exists, or if I do, I feel that God has nothing to do with me. Right? And that's a fundamental error we're making in our decision-making processes. Right? Because if God does exist, and this is something that I thought about a lot in my first incarnation. If God exists and is real, then surely the best possible life you could ever live is about receiving information from the creator of me. Right? If I can receive information from my creator, it's going to be way beyond anything I receive from my mum and dad. Way beyond their level of expertise or knowledge on any subject. Way beyond their ability to even understand if I keep progressing. And that's what it turned out for me to be in the first century and now. I know now far more my mum and dad now. You know, none of you probably have ever seen a picture of my mum and dad or anything, but my mum and dad now are, my dad's 80, just let me work it out, he's 82 and my mother's 77, and they're not happy. They're not content. They're not happy with life. They have every modern convenience, probably that all of you have, and still not content. They are scared witless of their death. They're terrified of dying. They are doing everything they possibly can to not die. My mother's had cancer in 3 different locations of her body. She gets it ripped out every time. She is petrified of dying. She keeps saying to me whenever I call her, which isn't that often, but whenever I call her, it's like, I just want to live another year. There was a period of just a year or so ago, she couldn't walk. She couldn't go outside. She had to have carers come in to care for her. She was so sick and ill. She was on death's door. She had a heart condition while at the same time having cancer. And she just wanted to live another year. Because she doesn't believe in the spirit world. She doesn't believe that when you die, you're not dead. Right? Her religion teaches her that when you die, you're dead as a doornail. That's what the religion teaches her, and that's what she believes. Right? And so she's doing everything she possibly can just to live eke out another few minutes of life. She's very, very worried about about my brother, and has a big, very damaging relationship with him, and very concerned about what's happening in his life, and I won't get into that, but she's so distressed all the time. And do you think she ever cries? She hasn't learnt humility. She can't even let herself cry. Imagine the pain she's in. She's in an immense amount of pain. And she still can't cry. Still can't feel. My father, much the same. He's 82. He's had prostate cancer, had all that removed. He's had so many sicknesses and accidents, particularly accidents. My father is accident prone. Because he's just reckless with his body, he still rides a 900cc motorcycle at 82 years of age, and of course has a lot of struggle with it. So he's still trying to live his life of joy. My dad, but very unhappy, very grumpy all the time. So it's funny when we did visit there. I was 12 months ago.
Yeah, 12 months ago.
Yeah, and he's just so grumpy all the time. As soon as my dad walks out the door as well, my mum starts talking about him. She's so upset. And then when he walks back into the door, she's smiling at him. They've been together for 50. They were married when my mother was 16.
6 years once we baby, or 61.
Yeah. 61 years they've been married.
More, 60.
62 years. Yeah.
No, sorry, yeah, 62.
62 years, yeah. They got married because pregnant with me, right? But 62 years in that unhappy state. And I look at them and go, you don't need to be this unhappy. You don't even need to be here. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the spirit world is like, there's so much more freedom. Just even when you're in such a terrible state, there's more freedom than that. You know, so yeah, I don't. And again, what I see, and is exactly what I saw with my first century parents. Your belief systems control, to a large extent, how much fear you have, and therefore control to a large extent how you use your life. Yeah. One more question before we go for lunch.
10 to 2.
10 to 2, isn't it?
Yeah.
An extended lunch. No, a late lunch, we call it. Yeah, just one more. Go.
Okay, but I had several questions. But the most important is for me. You're just talking. Your mother isn't able to cry. The same for me. So how can I learn it?
Yeah. Now these are things we want to discuss tomorrow. Yeah, we want to focus our attention on how to soften up the soul. You know, and we want to focus a bit more of attention tomorrow on the human soul and its attributes and its qualities that you were born with, and then what's happened to them, and then how to recover those attributes and qualities. See, the problem for the majority of us is with our soul is we've been taught, in humanity has taught us to detune from the soul and to become more and more in our mind, you know. And the same process happened to me in this life. Like when I was 33, I was so much in my mind, I didn't know really what a feeling was. I hadn't cried since I was about, properly, you know, since I was about 6 or something. And I'd had a lot of things happen to me during that time that I could have cried about, but I didn't. You know, I didn't even know how to cry really. And I finished up going to get some help in the terms of body worker, and one of the very first things I learnt to do there was to cry again. You know what I mean? Like, it was something I just didn't know how to do. So, to be frank with you, I was just as tuned as you were, many of you are now. So it's not, you know, it's not what do you call it? Unrecoverable. Irredeemable. That's the beauty of the soul. It's that you can recover from it. So we need to, you know, maybe talk about firstly some theories about that, you know, the soul and honouring emotion and things like that. But also maybe we need to talk a little bit about what you do in practice to have a bit of a breakthrough as well. Like what can you do to soften up and get yourself to be more reflective about the feelings you have. Yeah. So that's all part of our discussion tomorrow, hopefully. Yeah. Good. Well, let's have something to eat, shall we?
I just ask at the reception if we can sit outside, even if we eat our own stuff, and we can do that.
We can do that, yeah. And where's outside?
It's out there, and then take a right, and you see the terrace coming.
Oh, there's a terrace
out there.
It's
a big
one.
one.
Oh, you're good.
Thanks, Alex.
How long?
Can we make it 1/2 hour? Enough time?
So back at about 25 past 2.
Yep.